Trying to look smart is the dumbest thing you can do in medicine. I spent 16 years looking stupid on purpose. In classrooms, in front of attendings I was trying to impress, and that's the only reason I scored in the top 0.1% at Stanford. Most students do the opposite. Let me show you why. Now, before I show you what 16 years of looking stupid actually looks like, I have to tell you what I mean. Because most people hear looking stupid and assume I mean like making dumb jokes or playing dumb. I don't. What most people call intelligence isn't actually intelligence. It's rather a snapshot in time. It's as if you're going to be judged for your entire life based on one specific moment and you were optimizing for that one moment. The thing that actually matters instead is your trajectory. In other words, where it is that you end up. And the only thing that determines your trajectory of knowledge is your rate of learning. So I want you to define intelligence that way. Not the person who says the fewest dumb things or gets caught, looking stupid in front of their friends, but rather the person who learns the most from every single interaction. Those are completely different things that you're gonna optimize for. Now, for me, 16 years ago, I decided to optimize for the second one. Now, specifically, I wanted to make sure that I learned the most from every single interaction. In other words, I didn't care so much how it is that I looked in a particular moment, or rather, I cared, but I didn't try to optimize for that particular outcome. Instead, what I cared about was how quickly I would learn and how much I would accumulate over time. For me, the cost of looking stupid in front of people that I was trying to impress was acceptable because the benefit that I would achieve, or at least the hypothesis that I had, was that it would be well worth it in the long run. So let me show you exactly what that looked like. Have you ever been in a classroom or a meeting or a coaching call where you had to ask a question and you didn't ask it because you knew that it might make you sound dumb? So I remember one of my first lectures at Stanford, and I had this exact question. It was a presentation from one of the famous researchers, and he was talking about Gleevec. Now, in fairness, at the time, I didn't really know anything about Gleevec, but what I did know is that the pharmaceutical industry had a lot of influence on medicine, and specifically, professors and things like that. He had started out this presentation without giving any sort of financial disclosures or things like that. And so I kept wondering, he was presenting all of this wonderful data on Gleevec, and I was like, I wonder, is it possible that this guy has some sort of ulterior motive? Now, again, to be clear, I'm not saying that every single person that gets a paid relationship with Big Pharma is necessarily in bed with them, and let's not go there. But what I am saying is that if you don't disclose those relationships, at a minimum, discredit what it is that you're saying, and at worst, it can actually influence what people might say. I raised my hand in front of a group of almost 100 people, and I said, can you please say whether you have any financial disclosures with Big Pharma? And I remember specifically having my face completely flushed. Now, in fairness, I should give you a little bit of background. I used to be the kid in high school and middle school and college even, where if I had to say something in class, I would get so nervous that I would sweat, and I would sweat so much that my glasses would get foggy. And I remember because I was in a number of classes where participation was a big part of our grade, I would have to try and figure out when in the conversation or when in the discussion I could kind of get in a word edgewise. And so for me to raise my hand in front of a room full of people that I barely knew, including a lot of classmates that I wanted to, impress and look smart in front of, it was completely mortifying. Ultimately though, what I knew is that despite the fact that I had this immense embarrassment of speaking in front of other people, is that what I cared more was how much I could actually learn and trust my knowledge. And so if I was going to learn all this stuff about imatinib or, Gleevec, I wanted to make sure that it was actually something that I could trust. So the funny thing is, it turned out that the guy had no financial ties to Big Pharma, and, he was just talking about this drug that had made such a big difference in his practice. And so I was, kind of relieved. But I think that the bigger lesson that I learned was that even though it was totally terrifying for me before it is that I, got up in front of, a bunch of people and asked a question like that, was that I survived. I was okay. So that was the first step for me to really embrace intelligence in the sense of I'm going to maximize how much it is that I learn every single day. And so if you talk to people that were my classmates around the same time, they will tell you that I became the guy. First of all, I would go to every single lecture live. I wasn't one of those people that would sit and watch the lectures in my, in my dorm room. In addition to that, I would go up to the lecture after every single lecture and I would ask questions. Specifically, I would make sure that I would write down questions during the lecture that I would ask them afterwards, things that weren't clear to me. It forced me, because I committed to asking lecturers questions in between every lecture, because I had committed to doing this, it forced me to really pay attention. Now, in the beginning, I'm sure that a lot of people thought it was really weird. And I'm sure that there were a lot of people at the end that thought it was really weird because, I would get comments from people like, oh, just memorize it. Why do you care? Why do you care about the mechanisms? Why do you care about the principles or things like that? Just learn first aid. I was like, no, like what I care about is I'm paying a huge amount of money to be here. I want to make sure that I am the kind of future professional where I'm not just like saying things just because it's my opinion. Like I actually remember the basic sciences and I can use that to better the lives of the people that I'm caring for. And so it was okay, right? Like because I had a larger vision of what it is that I wanted to accomplish, it was okay for me to bear the cost of, looking stupid in front of all of my classmates and some of my professors some of whom, I remember one time there was a professor that was basically like, did you read the book? And it was embarrassing, like, cause he said that in front of a group of my peers. And I was like, oh my God. But again, I was okay with that because I wanted to make sure, for every dismissive professor, there was like 5 people who were glad to talk to me and who were happy to share the knowledge that they had. And regardless, it was a great opportunity for me to learn from true experts in these fields. If you find this helpful and you want other tips for how it is that you can learn more in less time, be sure to check the description and sign up for our 14-step free program where we'll walk you through some of the most important lectures that we found for helping people to improve their scores. In addition, if you are a medical student, resident, fellow, or attending and you're studying for your board exam and want to get higher scores even faster, then be sure to sign up for a free consultation with my team where we'll look through and see what it is that might be holding you back. And if there's something that we can do to help, explain what it would look like to work with us. So if optimizing for learning rate looks like asking dumb questions in public, why don't more smart people do it? Because the honest truth is that almost no smart students that I know, or maybe actually does something like this. And so the reason for that is pretty simple, right? It's because we're trying to protect our image. And there's a real biological reason for that. Our brain treats psychological threats like asking dumb questions in front of a room full of people that you respect the same way that it treats physical threats. In other words, we have the same sort of metaphorical fight or flight response and the same cortical response to something that damages our ego or threatens our ego as we would to something that actually threatens our physical being. So when we are sitting in a lecture with a question in our throats and we are deciding like whether we're going to ask it or not, it's not that we're weak, right? It's that literally our nervous system is doing exactly what it is that it was built for. It's as if it's running away from a tiger. The problem, obviously, is that the tiger in this case is imaginary. The cost of not asking the question, however, is real. And so every question that I would swallow, like where I was like, oh, I don't know if I should ask this question, whether it was in a study group or in, a lecture, that cost me real points, either, on test day or later on, on the wards or things like that. Whereas now, I don't think anyone cares about whether I ask questions or not in class like 17 years ago. Now, so most of us understand that it's really scary and embarrassing to ask things in front of, a group full of people. But what most people miss is that this is the exact opportunity that presents itself for people that are willing to take this plunge. I'm not a genius, and I know that that might sound like some false modesty, but like I know true geniuses who like they can just listen to a lecture. They don't have to take any notes. They have near photographic memories. Like there's no way that like I could compete with them if it came to raw talent. Instead, what I was doing was something that was just emotionally difficult. I didn't need talent. I didn't need better resources. I didn't need a big brain. I just needed to be able to do this hard thing that was emotionally challenging every single lecture of every single day. I just had to be consistent. And the fact that I was literally the only person that did this throughout all of medical school meant that there was a massive opportunity here for me that no one else was taking advantage of. Now I know I've heard a lot of people complain, especially those of you who are, like maybe it's a second career or maybe you're a little bit older. I hear a lot of people that are like, oh my God, especially in the preclinical years, it's so unfair because the students that come in and they've studied biology or they studied chemistry or they studied whatever, and they came in with all of this knowledge, it's so unfair. Medical school favors people who just, like spend all their time in class and they're not, really focused on like the clinical work. I mean, yeah, maybe part of that is true, but it's also true that the people that are the ones that are learning the most are the ones that are doing the uncomfortable work. Said a different way, it is emotional maturity, right? Being able to have the feelings, right? Have these feelings of, oh my God, I'm so worried about what other people think, and yet separating my actions from it, right? Even though I'm embarrassed by asking this question, I am still going to ask the question because what I care more about is my ability to learn and retain and use this information in a long-term context for my future patients, for my future students, for my future colleagues, whatever it is. I care more about my values than I do about my short-term discomfort. And hopefully that thought is comforting to you because you don't have to be a genius to do it. Like you just have to be willing to deal with some discomfort. And to be really honest, once you do it a little bit, like you just become that person. And it's like, oh, people are like, oh yeah, well, Alec's asking questions of the professor again. And eventually it got to the point where people really started to respect me for it, because like they knew that it was challenging for them to do it. And it wasn't like I was taking time away from other people. It's like the 10 minutes in between the first lecture and the second lecture, and the 10 minutes between the second and the third lecture, I would just go up, and instead of just, talking to, random people or, like surfing the internet or things like that, I would actually just try and take advantage of that time and learn during that time. And so I would have people then come up to me afterwards and be like, hey, like, so what'd you learn? So the good news is, if you yourself are one of those people that's like, I either am okay with doing hard things or I want to become the kind of person who does hard things, then this is a perfect opportunity. Like, there are so many opportunities in medicine for you to, like, without being too disruptive, right? Just find opportunities to talk to, like do uncomfortable things that maybe cause you a little bit of embarrassment, but will increase your rate of learning. Because if you look around you, because it is so emotionally challenging, and because any sort of emotional challenge is going to trigger that fight or flight response, most people aren't going to do it, which means there's a massive opportunity if you just take the first step. Now, let me show you, after 16 years of doing this, what it actually compounds into, because the numbers don't really sound real until you see them. Now, 16 years is a long time to do anything on purpose, because I've been doing this since pretty much my first year of medical school. And the result of doing this particular thing for that long is hard to describe without sounding like I made it up. So let me just show you some of the math. The most visible version of this practice in my life is in spaced repetition. Now, what I did to make sure that I took full advantage of all of the embarrassing moments that I was going is I made sure that all of the gems that I would get from professors, where they would say this, random thing that was like, oh yeah, I remember once there was a professor that said, oh yeah, almost all of the viruses that cause cancer are DNA viruses. And the reason is that a DNA virus has a vested interest in making sure that the cell has to reproduce and have more DNA nucleotides like floating around, because RNA viruses, there's always RNA floating around. And he just said this like as an offhand comment, but I was like, oh my God, that is so brilliant. Like, there are just so many things that you can tie together with just that one observation. And so I would take those facts and then I would put them into Anki cards, and I would make sure that I did my Anki cards every single day so that I never forgot any of those facts. So I've made over 28,000 flashcards over the last 17 years, and I've done over 913,000 reviews, and I would do them, before breakfast and every day. And I was doing this basically every day for 16 years. Because what happens is that the more you learn something and the more you know about any topic, the faster it is to learn anything related. And so in the beginning, I came in, I had taken 2 years off before medical school. I had felt like really dumb because there was not a lot that I knew about biology, and I'd never taken a medicine class or anatomy or anything like that. I came in pretty much as a blank slate. But very quickly I accumulated a lot of knowledge, and because I made sure that I increased my rate of learning, and because I made sure that I never forgot what it is that I learned by using spaced repetition appropriately, it dramatically increased the rate at which I was able to accumulate more knowledge. Functionally, what this meant is that I scored in the top 0.1% on step 1. It also meant that I didn't have to study pretty much for step 2 and step 3. I still scored in the top 10%. I think I studied once for one of my anesthesia boards, and then I didn't study for any of the other ones. And I think for 3 out of my 4 anesthesia boards, I didn't study, and I still scored in the top 10%. I actually did my anesthesia written boards after I graduated residency without studying. I just walked in and I just took it because I had just accumulated so much knowledge. I had increased the rate of learning so much in my first several years of learning, and I made sure I never forgot it, that I just stopped having to study for major exams. And I specifically remember thinking so many times in my 3rd year and my 4th year and residency where people would tell me oh my God, you must read so much. And I would think inside, I don't read at all. I just have made sure that everything that I learned early on, I kept. And then I just, would ask questions, and I would, try to make sense of things and, tie things together and make connections. And that was pretty much it. I really did not work that hard in terms of maintaining my knowledge. Obviously I had to work on other things. When I did my anesthesia residency, there was a lot of things that I had to learn in terms of various skills. But in terms of the knowledge, there was not that much that I had to continue to learn because I could just remember so much. Even in my anesthesia residency, there was a lot of lectures that I'd learned in my first couple years of medical school that I could just remember those things. And because I'd, again, talked to the professors either during class or, in between classes, and I just retained that knowledge. And in order to maintain that, it's literally less than 30 minutes a day that I'm studying, because, the number of cards that come up that I have to review out of my, 28,500 some cards is 50 or fewer. That's less than 1%. It's I don't know, like 0.5% of all of my total collection that I have to see on any given day in order to remember all of that information. That's really the second part is that you can think of your accumulated knowledge as the rate of learning divided by the amount that you're forgetting. And so really all I was trying to do was to maximize the amount that I learned every single day, right? By doing, difficult things and by making sure that I just never forgot the things that I learned. And when you combine those two things, it is incredible what the results can be. Again, I'm saying all this stuff not to brag, but because I just want to show you that even for someone that's like a normal person, I was able to dramatically increase how much it is that I was able to retain with diminishing effort over time. So for me, getting to the top 0.1% at Stanford wasn't about raw intelligence. It was just about sustained willingness to confront being wrong, looking stupid every single morning, including all the years that looked like nothing was really working. And the thing that took me an embarrassingly long time to realize is that this exact pattern shows up pretty much everywhere, not just in study. Because here's what I see in coaching every single week. Because I coach medical students, residents, fellows, and attendings for some of the highest stakes exams of their lives. In some cases, literally people, if they fail this next attempt of say step 3 or their ABIM or something like that, they will either lose their job or they will lose their career. And what I can tell you from working with so many students over so many years is that the students who own their mistakes are the students who improve the most. And the ones that hide them, right? They do the emotionally understandable thing. They run from the difficult situation. Those are the ones that are typically the ones that stay stuck. So let me give you some examples. So the students who show me their worst question in coaching are the ones that improve fastest, right? So for example, they're like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed for missing this. I don't understand why it is that I could miss a question like this. When a student shows me that question, I'm like, oh yeah, oh, okay. Like that's very normal. Like that's okay. Let's try and figure out what the pattern is. Whereas there are so many students that come and they're like, they don't want to show me the weakness, or they will be procrastinating all week, or they won't be doing their Anki cards, or they won't be, doing questions, and they'll just try to hide it. What I can tell you is that I understand it. You don't want to do or say something embarrassing in front of other people, right? Because like when we feel insecure, it's like, of course we don't want to show that to other people, but I can tell you that it's not about intelligence that's holding them back. In many cases, they're paying for help, and yet they're not bringing their problems to show me. You kind of have to like dig and be like, okay, like show me your stats and things like that. But it goes so much faster for the students that are like, you know what? I didn't do anything this week. And I don't know, like I'm just really procrastinating all the time. And like, I feel really overwhelmed because of XYZ. And like I'm just not doing all of my cards. And like, tell me, like, what is it that I'm doing wrong? Those people do tons better and improve so much faster than the ones that are like, I don't know, I'm like trying, I guess I'm doing it. Like, I'm not really sure. I just don't have a lot of time, right? They externalize it and they blame circumstances. It's the same thing with my team in my company, right? So the people who say, you know what, like this is what I'm struggling with. Oh man, I keep really struggling with this particular pattern or this particular thing. Oh, I don't really know what it is I'm doing wrong. Like, can you help? Do so much better than the ones that just pretend like there's no problems and only talk about their successes and only talk about the things that are going well. The mechanism is the same. The people that can sit with the discomfort at admitting that they don't know something, they get more reps at that particular thing and they get much more insight into that thing because it's like people want to help. Like I want to help them. If they're not honest with themselves about the problem, it takes so much longer for other people to help and to spot what's going wrong. And it's really just about being able to sit with that discomfort. That's why people aren't getting the help that they need. And here's a reframe that changes everything. Optimize for how you're going to feel in the future, not for how it is that you feel right now. In other words, imagine yourself taking the big test or, in the job interview or taking care of the crashing patient. Ask yourself, what would that person in the future hope that my present self, your present self, had done in the moments leading up to that particular, high stakes event? If you just think about it that way, it's usually pretty obvious that you're going to optimize for your long-term growth as opposed to your temporary discomfort. So if you're sitting here thinking, okay, but what do I actually do tomorrow? How can I make this work in my life? This is how you can do it. Probably the single most important thing that you can do immediately that I wish I'd started doing like years and years ago is to reframe how it is that I felt when I felt embarrassed. So for example, now when I get that like hot, embarrassed feeling like, oh my God, like why did I say that? Or, oh, am I really gonna ask this question? Instead of thinking, oh my God, like what's wrong with me, which is what I used to do, I will now say, this is good. Like this is like going to the gym and getting sore, right? It's like, I don't go to the gym after I work out and say like, oh my God, I'm so sore. Oh, this is so horrible. Like what's wrong with me? I'm like, yeah, that was a really good workout. This is awesome. It's that same reframe of looking at that same feeling of discomfort and thinking, oh yeah, no, this is great. Like this is what growth feels like. Because honestly, once I reframed it that way, everything changed. I started to actually look for that feeling as opposed to running from it. In other words, I started to look for moments where I could maximize my growth rather than trying to shrink away from it. So the next time that you're in class or you're in a study group or you're in a coaching call, just ask that one thing that you would otherwise filter out because you're afraid of what it is that someone might think. Don't preface it, just ask. And then when you feel embarrassed, because great, like, you will probably feel embarrassed, reframe that and say, yeah, that's awesome. Like, this feels uncomfortable. This is great. It's like going to the gym. Remember, you're not bad at exams. You just need to lower the threshold for looking stupid, right? The students who win in medicine and in life aren't the ones with the highest IQ, I promise. They're the ones with the lowest threshold for being wrong out loud. So if you want to see exactly what 16 years of this looks like in practice, where I did more than 28,000 flashcards every single day for almost 2 decades, watch I reviewed 28,655 flashcards every day for 17 years. I barely had to study.